Breaking news right now. Apparently, the EPA head, Scott Pruitt, has he has resigned. Trump just tweeted he is out. So that's all we have right now. We know, of course, that he's been embroiled in controversy for several months now about his expenses, about this condo that he rented in D.C. It was just about four days ago that someone walked up to him in a restaurant and said that he should resign. They challenged him. He actually got up and left that restaurant. And now the president has just tweeted seconds ago, we're still waiting for that tweet, that Scott Pruitt has, in fact, resigned, is the information we are getting. The pressure has been immense against him and for his handling of certain deals, as well as his handling of expenses. Scott Pruitt, the EPA chief, has now resigned. We are still waiting for more information about this. When we get it, we will bring it to you. We're going to look for some more information as well about why this happened and the timing of all this. Remember, the president had just left to Montana. The president is now en route to Montana. He is over there in Montana tonight, trying to actually get rid of the Senator John Tester and campaign for Matt Rosendale. The tweet we have right here, and it says, and I'm quoting, "I have accepted the resignation of Scott Pruitt as the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency. Within the agency, Scott has done an outstanding job and will always be thankful to him for this. The Senate confirmed Deputy at EPA Andrew Wheeler. The Senate confirmed Deputy at EPA Andrew Wheeler will apparently replace him." I'm trying to read this off of this thing. If we can make it bigger, that'd be great. "On Monday, assumed duties as the acting administrator of the EPA. I have no doubt that Andy will continue on with our great and lasting EPA agenda. We have made tremendous progress, and the future of the EPA is very bright." Again, Scott Pruitt is out, and Mr. Wheeler is now in. We will get information. We're trying to get John Roberts back up on the North Lawn for us, more on this. And remember, the EPA chief, Scott Pruitt, here has been embroiled in the controversies about his expenses. The administration said, okay, we went past that. And then there was the condominium in D.C. He rented this condominium, $50 a night. It was one room. And apparently that was also controversial because it might have been against the rules. The administration, again, overlooked that. He's been under great pressure from even conservatives saying that the EPA chief, Scott Pruitt, needs to resign. And now he apparently has resigned. We just did a story a couple of days ago on a woman who walked up to him in a restaurant, and Scott Pruitt was sitting there, and he was eating, and the woman walked up to him and said, in fact, she videotaped it, and she posted it on social media, literally reading Pruitt the riot act about the list of controversies that he was embroiled in, and she ended by saying, "You should resign." Scott Pruitt looked her directly in the eye. He did not say a word, but then as she walked back to her table, Scott Pruitt got up, he walked out of the restaurant, and that was the last we'd heard of it until minutes ago when Scott Pruitt resigned. Let's get to the chief congressional correspondent, Mike Emanuel. He's live for us on Capitol Hill with what he's gleaning from this. What are you learning, Mike?
Well, Trace, we know from talking to folks on Capitol Hill that a lot of people, a lot of Republicans, allies of this White House, thought it was time for Scott Pruitt to go as head of the EPA. Republicans got tired of defending Scott Pruitt's actions during his time in office. They felt like he did not defend his actions very well in public settings, such as his interview with my colleague Ed Henry on Fox. And so bottom line, there were a lot of allies of this White House who thought enough was enough, and we believe there were enough people inside the White House who felt the same way about it. And just the question was, basically here in Washington, you're always asked, does this person have the confidence of the President of the United States? And quite often in this town, they say yes until the person's gone. And so bottom line, Scott Pruitt is out, and I don't think anybody behind me on Capitol Hill is terribly surprised after a series of bad headlines over recent weeks and months, basically making him look bad and also reflecting poorly on the Trump administration. So bottom line, there will be a new EPA administrator picked by President Trump, and I think a lot of Republicans on Capitol Hill will be breathing a sigh of relief.
Yeah, and Mike, we talked about this as for some color on this. I mean, it may have come out of the blue here. A lot of people, a lot of controversy surrounding Scott Pruitt. But yesterday for the 4th of July, Scott Pruitt was at the White House. He was there. I mean, he seemed in good spirits from everybody. And apparently the decision was made sometime this morning. As we said earlier, President Trump is now on his way to Montana. He is campaigning for Matt Rosendale there, campaigning against John Tester. And so the president apparently released this tweet above Air Force One. And I just want to, if I can, very quickly, I want to read this again because I now have it. It says, I have accepted the resignation of Scott Pruitt as the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency. Within the agency, Scott has done an outstanding job and will always be thankful to him for this. The Senate confirmed Deputy at the EPA, Andrew Wheeler, will on Monday assume duties as the acting administrator of the EPA. I have no doubt that Andy will continue on with our great and lasting EPA agenda. We have made tremendous progress, and the future of the EPA is very bright. Mike, do you know anything about Andy Wheeler at all? I don't want to put you on a spot here. Do we know anything at all about Andy Wheeler? And is it unusual for Scott Pruitt, EPA, anybody to give their resignation while the president is leaving town? What do we know about the chain of events here, the timeline?
To be honest, I've heard the name before, but I don't know much about him personally. Certainly in many of these situations, you know the principals, if you will, the head of the agency, but not so much the second or third layer people who are critical players. And so if this person has the confidence of the president, then the president's saying to you, this is my guy, at least for now, and going forward, the EPA will be in good hands. And I should be very fair to Scott Pruitt. There are a lot of conservatives who think that what he was doing on the job was very helpful in advancing the Trump administration agenda, and perhaps that is why President Trump held on to him for this long. But there were a lot of people saying, you know, essentially the headlines are bad about this guy. It doesn't look good, including some suggesting that he was trying to push out the Attorney General Jeff Sessions, and then he had to defend against those comments as well. And so bottom line, Scott Pruitt is on his way out of town. The president letting you know the EPA will be in good hands, and we'll see if this acting person gets the job permanently or whether there's somebody else the president has in mind for this high-profile post.
And you make a great point there, Mike, because the president himself has many times said Scott Pruitt is doing a heck of a job. And, Mike, stand by if you will. I want to go to John Roberts, who's now live for us again on the North Lawn. And, John, I mean, we just talked to you a few minutes ago. Is this a surprise? Was this anticipated? I know he's been embroiled in controversy, but this resignation at this time, surprising?
I think it's sort of the case of death by 1,000 self-inflicted wounds. I had breakfast with the EPA administrator a couple of weeks back in which we went over all of the allegations against him. And without going into a lot of detail because it wasn't off the record breakfast, he maintained his innocence in all of this, saying that there were simple explanations for a lot of the things that had been dug up about him. But certainly it's something that has raised a lot of concern with the White House over the months. Just the other day, Hogan Gidley, the deputy press secretary, said that it was troublesome, the latest news that they were hearing from Scott Pruitt, and that was the allegation that he had personally approached the president asking him to fire Jeff Sessions and appoint him as the attorney general. I was told by Scott Pruitt that that conversation never happened, that it was 100% false. But I do have Scott Pruitt just gave me his resignation letter that he sent to the president. It reads, quote, Mr. President, it has been an honor to serve you in the cabinet as administrator of the EPA. Truly, your confidence in me has blessed me personally and enabled me to advance your agenda beyond what anyone anticipated at the beginning of your administration. Your courage, steadfastness, and resolute commitment to get results for the American people, both with regard to improved environmental outcomes as well as historical regulatory reform, is a fact occurring at an unprecedented pace, and I thank you for the opportunity to serve you and the American people in helping to achieve those ends. That is why it is hard for me to advise you I'm stepping down as administrator of the EPA effective as of July 6th, that it is extremely difficult for me to cease serving you in this role, first because I count it as a blessing to be serving you in any capacity, but also because of the transformative work that is occurring. However, the unrelenting attacks on me personally, my family, are unprecedented and have taken a sizable toll on all of us. My desire in service to you has always been to bless you as you make important decisions for the American people. I believe you are serving as president today because of God's providence. I believe that same providence brought me into your service. I pray as I have served you that I have blessed you and enabled you to effectively lead the American people. Thank you again, Mr. President, for the honor of serving you, and I wish you Godspeed in all that you put your hand to. So that was a personal message from Scott Pruitt to the president. Again, it's kind of death by a thousand cuts here, and most of them self-inflicted, I think, just because of the nature of the news that was always swirling around Scott Pruitt. Most recently, this idea that he reached out to the president personally to ask him to appoint him Attorney General. Again, Scott Pruitt told me that that was 100% false. But then there was another story that he had asked his staff to try to get his wife a high-paying job somewhere in the $200,000 range. It's clear, though, that there was just too much of a swirl of negative news around Scott Pruitt for this to last much longer. And I think he probably had a conversation with the president, I'm surmising here, to say, look, it's become a real distraction here. It's probably better if I'll step down. So Andrew Wheeler, who's the deputy over at the EPA, who has been Senate confirmed, will take over at least for the interim as the EPA administrator. If I could point out one other thing too, Trace, in all the stories that were written about Scott Pruitt, there was one that really seemed to unfairly touch a member of his family, and that was his daughter, who had applied to the University of Virginia School of Law back in early November of 2016. It was written in a very prominent newspaper that Scott Pruitt used his influence as the EPA administrator to get her into law school. But it turned out that that publication had the wrong date on a letter of reference from a former Virginia legislator, and that she had actually applied to law school before the election, and she was accepted to law school before he was nominated, before Pruitt was nominated to be the EPA administrator. So all of this swirl, I believe, as a correspondent, as a journalist, as a reporter, unfairly swept up his daughter, but it has had a significant impact on her. But again, back to Scott Pruitt, there was just too much swirling around him for him to continue going on, as much as the president might have appreciated what he was doing at the EPA. Trace?
Yeah, and you said, he's talked about his family and his family kind of being fed up with all this stuff.